This is the Dope Black Dad podcast. My name is Marvyn Harrison. Today, I wanted to really talk to you about the mental health impact of racism. It has been extremely intense, I would say 10 to 12 weeks. It's pretty intense anyway, but specifically the last 10 to 12 weeks has been very intense. We've seen the impact of COVID. We've seen the impact of people passing away from COVID. We've seen the impact of people being arrested, stopped and searched during lockdown. We've seen the impact of being Black in the US and the UK during lockdown, during COVID in general. And we're seeing more and more videoed evidence of oppressive acts against Black people. And so last week we spoke about what it was to be an ally. The week before that, we talked about how tired and fed up Black people have become. And we've seen an incredible response from the Black and non-Black communities in response to this in many spaces. Today, I really wanted to talk about the mental health impact of racism. Today, I have Dr. Roberta Babb. How are you, Doctor?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join this podcast.
How would you like me to reference you? Is it Dr. Roberta? Is it Dr. Babb? How are we doing this? I really want to be formal.
Dr. Babb is fine.
Dr. Babb. So Dr. Babb, first and foremost, I contributed to a BBC piece last week, and it was about the mental impact of racism. And I spoke very candidly, and then I went home. I was sitting at the TV with my wife, and then you came on and said everything that I was trying to say, but much better.
No, I just repeated it, saying the same thing in multiple ways to hope the message. So, you paved the way, I just followed.
I love this. This is the kind of support I want from my team, which I really struggle to get. And speaking of my team, I have Umar and Donald, the ungrateful twins, with us today. How are you two doing?
I was okay until about 15 seconds ago when you decided to bury us.
I'm going to be honest. I'm going to look around the tiles and be like, who would I like to run Dope Black Dads with? And I would pick Dr. Babb, but I am happy that I have you two. See?
Wow, just happy. That's what
I accept. Oh no, I tolerate.
Noted, Marvyn. Noted.
So, Umar, you have worked as a legal professional in the mental health industry. What has been your experience personally, but also through the work that you've done of mental health, the impact of mental health due to racism?
Yeah, so obviously I'm a mental health solicitor by trade. I've been practicing for it's about 10 years now. I took a break late last year, but kind of looking to get back into it again now. But my experience there's been institutional racism definitely within the legal profession. I think people like to quote that it's quite high, as in the statistics of BAME people working within the profession is at 24%, I believe, which is higher than the national average. But that doesn't mean that there isn't issues that are going on there. And actually what I tend to find is a lot of glass ceilings that are needed to be broken down, which is still unattainable for especially Black professionals. And just even the barriers to entry, whether you come from a low socio-economic background, and then when you're actually in the profession, being able to progress. So getting to partner level, being a judge in the judiciary, all of these things are huge issues. And it does take a mental toll on you. So for me, it was a case of I've been grinding for so long, and then come October last year, just suffered a complete burnout, and I just needed to step away from it all, which I have done over the last 6 or 7 months or so, just to kind of regather my thoughts and understand a little bit better about what it is that I need to do. And now I kind of feel like I'm in a place where I'm ready to get back in there. And in light of everything that's been happening as well, I feel like I can't walk away from the profession. I need to be part of the change that needs to happen within the profession. I mean, I've written an article for the Law Society Gazette, which is our industry newspaper, which is dropping, I think it's today, on Tuesday, which is going to send a huge amount of ripples, because I've written very candidly about the level of racism that there is. And I think that is the starting point, really, that we need to have this conversation, and people need to get comfortable and start having this conversation before we can then move on about what action and change needs to happen for it to be a lot more of an inclusive profession to work in.
Donald, you live in I want to say the Midlands because it's too far away from me for me to come and visit. But you live in the Midlands. It's not particularly a predominantly it's the Midlands, predominantly black area. What have you seen and noticed in terms of living in a less diverse area, and generally just in your life? 'Cause I think up until yourself and your wife said that your relationship with racism was different before and after Dope Black Dads. Could you speak to that? Are you there? Have you passed away, or Donald?
Yeah, I mean, we live in Hertfordshire, Midlands. There are limited. Well, you won't see a lot of black people around here. And what I have found is on the social media, for example, on the social media page that we have where we live, we had people coming out with all sorts of things, and that kind of shook us a little bit. You know, far right activists coming out and saying, you know, protesting, looting, rioting, you know, and this is during COVID. So it got to a stage where I just had enough. And I just had to say, look, this is not on. And you know what? In essence, I'll take you all on with words. And you know, you guys, and call it out for what it is. And I think once you call people out if you call someone a racist, that is more harmful when they kind of step back and kind of have to look at it, and you know, the fence goes up straight away, and they have to look at themselves. And I think, you know, pre Dope Black Dads, I had a very different relationship to racism. Being a guy, I think I faced racism on a daily basis. I was quite aware. I grew up in Northwest London, so I was quite aware that I was very different. Whereas my wife, she'd never experienced racism till Dope Black Mums, you know, and I always
being conscious of it. Would you say be conscious of it or experienced it? Experienced
it, period. Not even conscious of it, because she can think back to a number of times where she could have experienced it, but it didn't happen. It didn't transpire. So she wasn't. It wasn't a case of she wasn't conscious of it, because I said exactly the same thing you said, Marvyn. I said, well, maybe there were racists, they just weren't aware of it. And she said, no, I just wasn't. It just never happened. So me trying to explain to her how racism, you know, transpires, and now having boys and girls, they're going to experience it very differently. That has taken a toll in itself, because it's almost having to re-educate her on as to what racism actually means. And just, you know, I think with myself, I think I've been through an up and a down, and I think specifically yesterday, she never watched the actual whole video, the whole George Floyd. And I watched it completely accidentally. I didn't know what was coming next, and then that happened, and I was kind of expecting something else to happen after that, and it didn't happen, and it really got to me. And I went through a phase where literally, minute after watching that, I hated all white people. Literally, I wanted to call every single one of them and tell them, "F you, get out of it. Don't call me, don't text, don't do anything." So my wife she hadn't seen that, and yesterday we were watching a documentary on Sky, and she just broke down. And I think it to me, it kind of put me back into a space where I had to think, well, this is how it's affecting her now. I need to protect her and go back into that space. So it's kind of created another mental shift for me into a protector now, having to protect her from what's going on around here. So it has been a tough 12 weeks or so.
Grow. Dr. Babb, we know that according to Mind in 2019, they stated that black people in the UK are more likely than white people to be diagnosed with mental health problems and to be sectioned. We know that those exposed to racism may be more likely to experience mental health problems such as psychosis and depression. This is the Mental Health Foundation also. And people from black and minority ethnic groups living in the UK are more likely to experience a poor outcome from treatment and disengage from mainstream mental health services. That's Public Health England 2019. What are you seeing in your work? And does anything that Donald said in terms of him and his wife's approach to it resonate as a common theme?
Most definitely. I think the main thing is that people are starting to see mental health as a continuum. It's not either or. I think when you start to look at a continuum, everybody has mental health, if you like, and we have mental well health and maybe mental unwell health. And I think the reality is that everybody's starting to see the impact of what's happening around them and really starting to get in contact with it. And I think what Donald described, what his wife experienced, I'm seeing a lot in my clinic, that a lot of people are actually finding themselves, for want of a better word, traumatized by what's happening. If we think about this sort of like race-based trauma, there's only so much exposure to pain we can take. And it's in so many domains of our lives. And I think social media is great and the news is great, but it does kind of like really put it out there all the time in its rawest and graphic versions that can't be denied. And thinking about what both Umar and Donald were saying, the paradox of change is you have to actually acknowledge the reality before you can change it. And so what we're seeing is that people are having to face up to their own experiences of racism, the microaggressions, the macroaggressions, the assaults and things like that, and then really start to question so many things in their lives. And I think if you put coronavirus on top of that, so many things have changed at once that we feel really kind of a little bit discombobulated. We don't quite know which way's up. So I think if we think about mental health as a continuum, which we all have, everybody is really, really hurting right now and really, really having to find new ways of trying to make sense of the world.
So do you feel like, and I suppose this is to the room, but do you feel like it has been the combined layering of COVID, multiple acts of racism, all the layers that were in COVID, plus historically what has happened, which led to particularly protests, because we've had people die at the hands of police before, and it hasn't led to this. How would you characterize the change?
I think you can see. Sorry, go on, Dr. Babb.
I was going to say, the biggest thing about the change, I think, is that so many people are experiencing the same thing at once. It's really hard to deny. And I think when you put it with COVID, when you put it with like transgenerational trauma, when you put it with the fact that people are having much more open conversations on social media, coming from all levels of the community and all walks of society, it's really the fact that actually we cannot stand still anymore. So I think all these things have come together in a way that's actually mobilized people, and people are working together as a community. And I think as the Black community, sometimes we felt quite fractured and fragmented. And this has definitely brought us together, which is sad, but I think at the same time, really, really powerful.
Yeah, and I think just coming off the back of that, throughout the whole issue of COVID, we've heard right from the beginning, you know, we've seen the number of deaths that have happened in the country. And then we're being told, if you're Black or ethnic minority, you are twice or 4 times as likely to die from it. So, you know, we're already, and it's kind of exposed the inequalities that are occurring anyway within the systems, you know, whether it's in the health systems, whether it's in the community systems. We've seen that front line. It's, you know, the first, I think, 10 doctors that died, and I think 8 of them were ethnic minorities, the first 10 to die. So, you know, you're being exposed to that level of trauma on a daily basis, and you're kind of having to think about, is it safe for me to go out? You're having to have these conversations with your head. Meanwhile, you've got a government that's turning around and saying, well, you know, statistically, you're more likely to be affected by this, but they're not coming up with an action plan as to how we're going to address it. So then, you know, you have that, and you're in your head, you're thinking, the government don't care about me. Then you have this the incident with George Floyd over in the States, and then that's kind of come over to here. And suddenly it's just kind of ignited something as Dr. Babb was saying, you know, it kind of brought people together as a community, because we're now turning around and saying, actually, enough is enough. We're sick of having to deal with all of the BS that's thrown at us. You know, it's hard enough, you know, you're waking up and you're going outside of your door and you have so much rubbish that you have to deal with before you've even got onto a train, before you've even got into your workplace. So, you know, all of these traumas that we're having to deal with on a daily basis have finally now kind of manifested themselves in this way. And people are just saying, we've had enough, we need to see change.
That's really interesting, because I think even from my personal point of view, I found, I'll say, pockets of a clearing at different times. And then once those clearings have occurred, I've then been layered with something else and then something else. And it's been very, very up and down, very difficult to get stable. I actually told the people that I work with that I'm downing tools for 2 days. And I took 3.5 of those days to completely do pretty much nothing and recharge with family. How would you characterize your current state? And I know, Dr. Babb, for you, how do you therapize yourself, or how do you, because you're a Black woman in the world too. Black women are actually the most affected when it comes to race and the intersection of gender. Actually, I'll go to you first. How do you reconcile your own experience with ultimately what your training is telling you?
I think the first thing is to recognize it. And I think what you're describing is what we call empathy fatigue. There's only, like I was saying earlier, there's only so much distress you can get in contact with. There's only so much you can give. And I think it gets to a point where sometimes we just have to dial back to dial it again. And that's okay. And I think it's really about giving ourselves permission to engage in this. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I think one of the things that's been really helpful for me is to identify and name quite clearly. So linking to Umar's point about the government, I think part of what the government are failing to do is not only identify it, but actually name it. So we're not just talking about racism, we're talking about anti-Blackness. And I think that's the subtle difference, because then you can really link it to the trauma, the emotional impact, the physical impact, the societal impact, the relational impact at all different levels, and how that actually impacts on our ability to engage with this cause. And I think the way I manage it is actually having conversations, knowing that actually I'm talking about it and I'm not going to be silenced or hidden anymore. And that's empowering. Have a duvet day, because it can all become very overwhelming.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Umar, how are you? How is it working for you? How are you doing?
I'd say at the beginning of lockdown, like my life just felt like it was kind of spiraling a little bit at that point anyway. So lockdown in a way has kind of allowed me to recenter myself as a person, and kind of allow myself to rediscover what I like, who am I, what am I about? Because I think up until that happened, because I turned 35 literally 3 days before lockdown started. So at that point, I was just like at a massive crossroads. Now I'm feeling a lot more centered in myself. I'm feeling a lot more kind of, engaged and ready for kind of a call to action. And I think that's why now I feel like I'm in a point where I'm tired of being a diplomat about things, and actually I'm just going to call it how I see it now, and I'm just going to say how I feel. And I was having this discussion with my wife the other day, and normally she's been the one that kind of, and I think the roles have kind of switched a bit. So she's become a bit more diplomatic because of the work that she does, and now I'm kind of becoming a lot more vocal about things, because I'm just tired of seeing the level of injustices that we're suffering. And people know, because I've spoken quite openly about the fact that I'd love to get into politics one day and kind of help to make a difference in that way. And for me, it's just about using the tools that I have, using the support and the resources to start having those conversations, and hopefully start to make a change from within, and then going out there.
Amazing. Dr. Babb, just very quickly, you touched on empathy, fatigue, and transgenerational trauma. Two words that made me, I should have done this really, because this is how I was like feeling inside. Can you give any more insight onto those two things? Because I think they're important for us to understand when we talk about what our actual experience is.
Yes, well, I suppose transgenerational trauma is really when you're thinking about the effects of the trauma are not necessarily resolved in one generation. And when the trauma is like ignored and there's no support in dealing with it, it's passed on both consciously and unconsciously to the next generation. And then we start to see these things that are very traumatizing as normal, and we internalize them, and then we pass them on to the next generation. And that's where you kind of get a sense of the historical element or the transgenerational element of it, because the original trauma hasn't been resolved, it just gets added to. And then I think with, go ahead.
Yeah, go on, sorry.
No, go ahead, that's fine.
And Donald, just for you, do you have any actual experience here? Because I think one of the things when we talk about racism, I feel it kind of falls on deaf ears, and I think it's a huge blind spot for white people specifically to understand and internalize that they could potentially be racist when they haven't sat there and consciously thought of the most offensive thing to say and use the N-word and punch the person in the face because of their color. If they haven't done that, they don't seem to register the fact that it's possible. Do you have any experiences that you could share that you feel like actually may give a bit of light in terms of the things that we're referring to?
Yeah, of course. I'll give you an example that happened not recently. A friend of ours, known her probably for about 20, 25 years or so. She was posting Candace Owens' far right movement kind of stuff on social media, and was approached by a number of friends, black, saying, look, this is not, we expect better from you, you're a friend, and we're happy to kind of provide you, point you down the right avenues to educate yourself on what she's talking about and that kind of thing. And she was so determined on calling out Black Lives Matter for not supporting, for talking about, being anti-abortion and all the rest of it. She was so dogged in that mentality that she completely lost herself in the idea that actually Black Lives Matter is more than just an organization, it's a movement. So in her mind, she was doing what's right by not supporting Black Lives Matter as an organization and a movement because of anti-abortion. She was Catholic, but then she failed to see that actually it's not just about that. It's about the trauma, the hurt that it's causing Black people, and the hurt that it's causing her friends specifically. So, after a number of conversations, we just had to cut her off.
Yeah, but isn't that stuff just about an opposing view about how to do something? When does that become problematic? How does that become problematic? What's an actual tangible in there? Because I think this is the challenge of conveying things. Is a lot of the thing is knowing what things mean, and I've been asking myself the question of what actually is an act of racism versus me making an actual assumption based on a repetition of an act. And so if I'm not living in the repetition of an act from the past, and I just look at what the person is saying, what they're trying to convey, do I convey that as racist because of how I feel or because of what they're actually meaning? And then also, how does that, this is to the room as well, how does that actually impact me? What does that stop me from doing? How does that prevent me from socioeconomically living somewhere, buying a particular type of house, getting a promotion? How does that impact me?
Okay, I mean, I'll put it for you this way: if it's a friend, the idea is that she'll educate her kids on racism or the privilege they have, right? Because those kids are going to have to mix with your kids at some stage. Okay, so the way I looked at it and how that manifested itself and how I understood what she was saying was, okay, I can't support Black Lives Matter. Of course, all lives matter, which is kind of one of the statements out there that is just, anyway, we won't delve into that. All lives matter. And I'm having to explain to her, well, of course, all lives matter. But in this particular incident, we're talking about Black lives. She's like, well, I can't just support a single cause. And I think that is when it becomes a bit more tangible for me, because what you're saying is you don't really care so much that there is one thing happening. When we grow up, our kids are gonna have to mix, are gonna have to socialize. So what you are teaching them is gonna perpetuate moving forward into our children. So, and that's where that's where I see the tangible, because I don't want my kids to go through what I've been through and what their forefathers have been through. So, I have to remove myself from that situation. And I think that, for me, that's where the tangibles and the reality of it sits.
Umar, can you bring the urgency of why Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter? What's the actual... why do Black Lives Matter, Umar? Sorry, 1 second. Wait, let me do that again. Wait. Umar, why do Black Lives Matter? Tell me.
Black Lives Matter because statistically and historically, Black people have been treated extremely badly by the system. We continue to face levels of injustices and inequalities throughout almost every fabric in society. So people are rising up because people recognize that actually Black people are disproportionately affected by laws that are made, by stop and search, by inequalities in the health service. And people recognize that that's not okay. All lives matter is a concept that, yes, in theory, I agree. And I've never disputed that all lives matter, because yes, all lives do. However, not everyone has the same access and the same privilege to systems that, if Black people do not have those same levels of access. And it's about having that equality across the board. And why it needs to start with Black Lives Matter is because when you look at it in depth, we are the ones who, both on both sides of the pond, here and in America, institutionally we've been badly affected. And in order for there to be a level playing field, there needs to be that recognition that that exists. Then we need to have those conversations around why that exists and how that exists. And then we need to start formulating action plans to eradicate those issues and ensure that we've got a level playing field for everyone.
What's really interesting is I think when I speak about an actual racial experience, what it does to me afterwards is a couple of things. I usually find myself at a sort of heightened, almost like a defense mode, so almost like I'm about to fight. So there's like adrenaline going through me, which I'm pretty sure isn't healthy over a consistent period of time and reoccurring often. I think it definitely puts a question of doubt in my mind in terms of what is happening and why. I think it's another layer of, I suppose, smallness in my character. Am I able to be as powerful as I should be? Do I see the world as I should be? And I think actually what it starts to come down to is, and I said this on BBC 5 Live, Umar, you've been on it before, right? So it's an internal joke because sometimes they alternate between us, and sometimes he gets bumped for me and I get bumped for him. But last time he got bumped for me, so nice. But isn't it just sometimes just a thing where we are trying to create an experience? We're all trying to get to the same place, regardless of race. It's all going to be all lives matter in 10, 20, 50, 100 years time anyway. So why don't we just act like all lives matter now, and hopefully Black lives will get an improvement, right? Isn't that how it works? Dr. Babb, do you have a view? That was a real exhale. I felt like I said to you in the 90s and I wolf whistled you and you were trying to articulate why to, I was going to say blood clot. I can say blood clot on my own podcast. Don't talk to me like that. And I felt like I did that to you. Where did I take you just then with that, with that, Dr. Babb?
I think part of the exhaling was, it feels like a difficult thing to say, because the reality is this has been going on for hundreds of years. And so the idea of like 5, 10, 15, 20 years feels very, very difficult to kind of see a radical change. I think change is happening and we are seeing things, but we're trying to deal with something that is entrenched. We're trying to deal with something that is very much part of nearly every fabric of our society at the moment. And I think it could feel really, really difficult. And I think that the response that you experienced is a typical response. Because when you have a racist experience, you are in a fight, flight or freeze mode, because that's like a trauma response. And then you're having to doubt yourself, you think, you're trying to make sense of it, what do I do? But there's also surprise. And so there's so many things going on and you're just thinking, where do I start? So I think that was kind of where my exhale was, because, it's like when I get asked a question, how do, from like non-Black people, how do I help you? Where do I start? And I think it might come from a place of curiosity, but I think it's much more helpful to come with, this is what I know, this is what I've read, let's have a conversation. Otherwise, we, the traumatized people, are going to have to then educate the very people that have traumatized us. And that feels like a reenactment of an unhelpful power dynamic.
That feels like a really real thing. I have had, I was trying to be really kind as they rang me, but there was a lot of white people who rang me just to check in, but also quietly say like, I didn't really know much about this thing and I didn't mean to like let it happen for so long. And, it's about me. And I had to explain or like hang up on people and like rush them off the phone because it was becoming extremely taxing. Is that an additional layer that is like, I have to explain my trauma to you while you'd be like, well, why didn't you just like fight back? Or why didn't you just say no? Or why didn't you write a letter? What doesn't that impact mentally as well? And also, how do you explain racism to somebody, like what it feels like? If you when they say like, try to explain to a blind person how to, what something looks like, how do you explain racism to someone that never has and never will experience it? Anyone.
And I think it's complicated, but I think what we can do is help people understand what racism looks like. So I think there is a fantasy that racism is someone verbally abusing you in the street. And therefore, if someone has like a microaggression, so, I had the other day, someone came up to me and goes, what's with the headscarf? These are little things, little attacks like this that other people wouldn't necessarily see, but you're starting to show that microaggressions happen at all elements of the interactions we have. And I think that's one way of actually challenging it, because I don't think white people really understand what it's like, but they can recognize and then start to think. And I think the idea is that it's great that people are curious, and I definitely want to, foster and help them be curious. But it's also about, what do you bring to this curious conversation? Are you coming with knowledge that wants to be sort of debated and discussed and understood, or are you looking to me to provide everything?
I had a really interesting quote thrown at me yesterday where this guy said to me that black men are the white man of the black community. Like, we dominate blackness in such a way. It hurt my feelings. Don't worry, I'm with you. Everyone's like scrolling their eyes like, what? But we play that same role that white men play over everybody. We like dominate blackness. We put ourselves at the center of everything. We don't make space for black women. We're not aware of the concerns of the LGBT community. We have absolutely no idea specifically about the trans community. And we're just like living here, micro oppressing everybody else because our lives aren't great. Is there any of that resonates? I'm glad we have a woman on the call to help us. I'm assuming you're a woman. Based on what I just said, I should actually invite the idea that you may not be, but you can clarify in your own time. I would like to know, does any of that resonate to you men? Does any of that resonate to us? We are the white men of the black community.
Nope.
No, I don't agree with that.
No.
Nothing. So tell me about your program to enroll intersections of blackness into your lives and making sure that they're at the center of conversations. How are you helping black women and supporting them with the concerns that they have? They've been very loud and vocal about the lack of black men supporting them. What are you two doing, Mr. I'm Not a White Guy?
Well, I celebrate black women all over, not just on social media. I think we did a campaign, and I think I came to you, Marvyn, and said, let's spend a week just getting black women's voices out there and just celebrating black women. And I think I almost find black women are the pillar of what a black household should be. That is my personal view, and I hold that true. And I celebrate my wife's involved in Dope Black Mums, to celebrate what they're doing on a regular basis, and not just the Dope Black Mums, but there's also looking at how we can improve looking how we can improve the LGBT and the trans community, and kind of move that from a way off idea to something that is a reality into our community, and integrate them into the black community, into an ideology that our forefathers had that wasn't healthy.
Dr. Babb,
I think for me,
let's create space for women. Dr. Babb, is there any is there any thing that resonated in terms of black men and making space and others? Have you heard of that in your work?
I haven't heard it put so, I suppose, powerfully, because that really does force you to stop and think. And I think what that sentence really does is really challenge you to kind of deconstruct the different elements and then try and make sense of everything. And I think one thing that I do struggle with when we have these discussions about race is that things become sort of reduced, and things kind of get skirted over, and it's like it, or the struggles, or the challenges, not actually what it looks like. So I think what I like about it, whether people agree with it or not, is that it promotes a discussion. I think that's the key. It brings evidence to light, it brings information to light, and we can have a conversation where we can create new meaning and move forward in a different way.
Yeah, I think one of the things is that I always see it as two work streams. There's how we're treated and seen in the world, and there's also what we do in our own community, in our own homes. And I think quite often the two are either conflated, i.e. there's black and black crime, so why are you worried about this other crime? They're two completely different things. But I think also just how we are going to form a level of success is by reconciling how black men and black women can work together to combat the experiences that we're facing. I have seen black women on the front lines giving everything, every inch, every piece of energy, fighting for this. And I've seen a lot of black men really just like pontificating in the background, kind of like thinking about, I think I know, like very, very sort of logical, headstrong, and like kind of like thinking a lot. But I'm seeing the action, the doing, the front lineage coming from black women. So it's just something I've observed. And I think when someone invited me to the idea that I am the white man of the black community, I kind of just wanted to listen and just see why they thought that, and what space I can create where they felt it was less like that, because I don't think that was said as a compliment. Another thing that I'm really is very loud to me is this idea of being triggered. It's a very new phenomenon in the world. It's kind of like people went en masse into therapy and came up with this idea about triggers, and it's now become a brand of its own, a world of its own in terms of things that trigger you. One person told me that the idea of being triggered is just the insight into the areas that you need to do more work. And someone said that triggers need to be managed because they impact you greatly. Dr. Babb, do you have a view on triggers and the role of triggers and how they're now popular culture?
I think, again, it goes back to my comment about how we're using one word to describe many different things. So I think traditionally triggers would be anything that evokes a strong emotional response in you. It's triggered you. But I think we're also now thinking about triggers as being sort of the things that you need to like look at, because actually they're triggering a thought process or a thinking or a reflective process. So I think, again, for me, it's about what does a trigger mean for any one person. So I think when someone says to me, oh, I've been triggered, or have you been triggered? It's like, well, what do you mean when you say triggered? What does that look like for you? Help me see it from your perspective. I think then we can slightly find a more specific language to describe the strong emotional responses we may have, the fear that we might not actually be in control of our responses, or, you know, the pain that actually comes with having to do self-reflection, or the liberation that comes with actually having the insight that you're not alone, or what happened to you really wasn't okay. And so it covers a wide range of different experiences, this one word called triggered.
And so in your view, is it about managing the triggers, or is it about that's where the work needs to go? Would you then say you should avoid, like, so I don't watch Black trauma anymore. I've been the whole genre. Sounds a horrible thing to call it a genre, but I've been there. Is that the healthier practice than it is to become at peace with what it is that's really happening and be closer to reality? I don't want to give you, I don't want you to therapize me, but I think I would like to probably dig into that a little bit if you could.
The first thing I think is about you need to do what works for you. And I think something about what you're saying is about, do I have permission to maybe do something different from people around me? And there's a sense that actually, if you're going to be involved in the anti-racism movement, what does it look like? Can we have different ways of being involved? And I think the idea with triggers is actually, first of all, you have to identify what is it that has actually triggered something in you, evoked something in you, because that might be the thing that you need to look at. Or it might be the thing that actually I need to look at how I respond to it. Do I need to actually fight against it? Do I need to accept it? Do I need to think about it? What do I need to do? And then you might be thinking, do I need to protect myself? Because the reality is we still have to function. We still have lives. And there's a fantasy that we can experience all the different traumas around us and then just put on a mask and then go to work. Just put on a mask and carry on. And actually it affects us. So I think you do what's best for you and you feel proud that you're doing what's best for you because it allows you to stay connected to the pain of the fight. It just might look different for everybody.
Yeah. What would you say the impact is of masking? I think that's we did have a conversation in our group about taking multiple personalities. I think one of the guys in our group said he had 3 personalities, one for work, one for his kids, and one for his wife, and then decided not to invent one for himself. What would you say the impact of masking is?
It's far reaching. So I think we all have had to do it to survive to different degrees. And I think the idea is about understanding or recognizing when you might be wearing a certain mask and recognizing the function of it. Because sometimes you cannot bring your whole self to an event or a space because actually it won't be tolerated or accepted. And it ends up doing you more harm than good. Other times it's very much about actually I'm going to challenge and take the mask off because people need to see me. So I think it's about really understanding the function of the mask having and actually whether you want to change it. And then how do you also look after yourself? Because if you don't have it on, you are vulnerable to something. You can be vulnerable to attacks and it can make it very difficult to survive. And these are the things that people are having to think about. And I think this is why conversations like this are so important, not only to have, but also for people to listen to, and therapy, because it offers that space to actually put down some of the things that we have to carry on a daily basis and be raw, emotional, and seen in our entirety, and begin to rebuild something that feels like it's been attacked over a long period of time.
Yeah. Umar and Donald, what would you say for you is the next steps, like based on preserving? You've been through this event. How are you personally in your lives trying to manage what's happened post this event, or are you still in the event now, or how are you feeling in terms of your next steps, and what did you learn from what's happened over the last 12 weeks?
I think for me, next steps is looking at, okay, society is starting to re-emerge. We're coming into like a new a new age, as it were, you know, the post-COVID-19 age, even though, you know, we are still living it. And for me, it's all about being part of the action for change. You know, that's how I kind of see it. And I've kind of taken the view that I'm now not afraid to ruffle feathers, and I'm not afraid to put people's backs up, because I think we need to have those open, honest, frank conversations, you know, and I'm speaking kind of from a legal, professional perspective. Well, people need to understand why, and especially when I'm writing about saying we have institutional racism, why that is, and kind of understanding how that affects people right from the beginning, you know, from the entry level, from school level, you know, how society kind of plays a role in all of that, and then how that kind of translates itself into the profession as well. So for me, it's about seeing, okay, what am I going to do to be an agent for change? Because I think it's so important that we push that forward. You know, I'm not going to sit here and just be like, you know, watching all these trauma videos and, you know, kind of getting involved in spats with people online. That's not a good use of my time, and that's not a good use of my energy. Good use of my time and energy is actually being out there, trying to get myself and people that look, and, you know, people that look like me around the tables to start having those conversations, and then start being able to make a change.
Donald, how are you doing?
I think I'm pretty much on the same page as Umar. I think it's all about opening the door for education of our own people. I think that's the first change. I think I'm trying to push educating myself in order to kind of educate others around me, and also, you know, being, like Umar said, part of the solution, and trying to figure out, you know, how we can progress from this and how we can change things, because it's all well and good going out, people rioting, protesting, talking about it, but what, you know, for me, it goes back to what are you doing personally to be an agent for change, to be part of the solution, and what work streams have you taken on to make that happen in a serious way, you know, and kind of moving it on from there.
Amazing. Dr. Babb, what would you say your advice would be for self-care and sort of managing your mental health during this time? Are there any tips, particularly at work, because we're all trying to work from home or parent from home, depending on who you're asking? Are there any sort of helpful resources that we can find, or any very specific advice around Black people, what they should be doing, how they should be engaging at this time would be useful?
Well, one of the first things is really to, I suppose, act compassionately towards ourselves, to allow us to feel and recognize the emotions we're experiencing and validate that experience. We're feeling an emotion for a particular reason, and it's a completely normal response to an abnormal situation. So I think once you can do that, you can then start to be in a space where you can think more caringly and compassionately about yourself. The other thing is about taking breaks and rests, because actually it's exhausting to be always exposed to the trauma. It's exhausting to always be thinking and reflecting and having to manage and navigate different spaces and different boundaries. So also making sure you do look after your body, you look after your health, you eat right, you sleep well, you know, all the normal things we'll be thinking. And also rest. It's really important to rest. And I think when we're in it, it's really difficult to switch off, because we can't switch off from the Black experience because it is our everyday.
That felt like a t-shirt. I'm going to just do that. You can't switch off from the Black experience. I really felt that. That resonated in my chest.
But it's true. So it's about having that. And then I think then thinking about boundaries, you know, you might have to have a no social media time or a no phone time. And that's okay, because you really are looking after yourself. And I think the third thing I think about caring for yourself is really connecting with the community. You know, there's strength in numbers, there's strength with others, and there's a strength in connections. And I think it's about finding different ways to connect and promote the community. It's not just about the rioting and the protests like Donald and Umar was saying, but also thinking about where are the success stories? Where are the stories of achievement? How do we get a different narrative out there about what Black people are doing and achieving, and balance that with the fight? Because you can't have one without the other. And I think it's really important that we do actually focus on both of those things.
That's been amazing.
I had a question for Dr. Babb, if you don't mind me asking.
Questions cost, my friend, but go for it.
So I just wanted to know what the level of mental health was for our youth pre-COVID-19, all of this going on, and what it's like now and what you envisage it to be. Because there'll be a lot that have experienced, trauma, that had been experiencing maybe trauma in an unfortunate place. And I had a harrowing story of a young lady I spoke to on one of our lives, 14 years old, was about to be sectioned at 14 years old. So I guess I want to understand what it was like pre-COVID-19 and what you envisaged it to be moving forward, and what are the things that can be done.
I think it's a whole different podcast. I think it's a massive question you're asking. I think we will see high rates but I think that's also because I think people are more willing to see things as traumatic, see things as impactful, see things as problematic. And so we're looking at the things like, housing, that has an impact on mental health. We're thinking about relationships, domestic violence, that has an impact on relationships on mental health, education and employment, all these different things have an impact on mental health. And so I think we're going to see more instances of it because actually people are looking, but also people are talking about it. I think this is why it's really important that we think about it as a continuum and try and be preventative rather than reactive. So we don't get to the point where you've got a 14-year-old potentially being sectioned, but you're helping people recognise their early warning signs when things aren't right, having areas to go to talk safely, so actually they can develop their resilience. Because emotional resilience isn't just the ability to cope with adversity, it's the ability to adapt to adversity. And that's the bit where people may struggle with, and that's the bit that's really preventative and can make a difference. But I think it's a really big question, and it's something that we have in psychology have definitely been preparing ourselves for, because the post-traumatic, if you like, recovery stage, when people have come out of the crisis, fight or flight phase, and actually they're thinking, what next? And that's when you start to get in touch with the pain, the despair, the loss, so many other things, and that's when mental health difficulties can increase.
Yeah,
it's a great question. Donald, I think we're going to give you a segment called Donald's Question. It's going to be like Tubes on Soccer AM, where you come in with a really big question at the end, where we're just about to wrap, and it's like, oh, let's do another hour. That's going to be your new slot. We're going to brand it and everything. So thank you.
I like that.
Guys, thank you so much. What I would say though is that I think my view to Black people is be kind to yourself, and understand that this is something that's bigger than any one individual can impact at this time. But I think it's like in that kindness, you will find space, you will find a place that you can create from to potentially create something that impacts the world in a much better way. I think a lot of people are trying to find answers today, right now, and the invitation to Zoom calls are very much welcome for solution building, but also understand that trying to come up with positive and creative solutions at this time for something so traumatic may not be possible. And I think to the non-Black people listening, I think it's always just an invitation to understand that when you discover that you have partaked or facilitated racism, you may not hear it from the Black person in a way that you directly understand. And so my invitation on the BBC was to believe Black people and take the time and actually hear for what's at play when they are communicating with you, because too often it's very difficult to communicate something that happens so often. And I think it happens in some sort of way with women and sexism, is that it's such a constant thing that sometimes you might just get a like, just like it may not come with the bow that you require or the academic acumen that you would like. And so sometimes you have to accept that offending people or hurting people's feelings is a place that is an opportunity for reflection. So thank you so much, Umar Kankia. Thank you so much, Dr. Babb. Where can we find you, Dr. Babb?
You can find me on the internet at thehanovercentre.com. That's where my website is for my practice.
Amazing. And thank you so much, Umar. I said it Umar already. I was looking at Donald. Sorry, you look like twins. I don't know why. A little bit racist, but it's happened. But thank you guys so much for just a little bit. But this is I'm British, so it's happened. Thank you guys so much for taking part today. I very, very much appreciate you all. Dr. Babb, anytime you need anything from me and my two wonderful friends here, do let us know. We are warriors in waiting. I'm pretty sure you end up leading us, to be fair. But thank you all for listening. Please make sure you subscribe to Dope Black Dads on the Dope Black podcast, wherever you find podcasts. But also you can email us and tell us all the things that we did right and wrong at hello@dopeblackdads.com. And you can also just visit our website at dopeblackdads.com. And we're on every single social media platform at Dope Black Dads. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all guys for joining me. And I'll see you again next week.